most teachers who have not done coding before feel hesitant and nervous, and that's completely accessible. Like, I totally understand where they're coming from, but I always just smile and say, "Sure, no problem. We'll work through this." And I know that once they experience that excitement when they do, have a bug and fix it, or when they start to see the type of thinking that's happening, especially when we have students sometimes included in PD, or if we're out in a classroom, they see the magic that's happening. It seems like magic sometimes. They see the special thinking that's happening, the way students are approaching problems, and the way they're really legitimately engaged. And so when they see that, I know that they want to do everything they can to support their students, and they just can't help but want to keep going because they see what it does for their students.
We are blessed in this country with just a plethora of wonderful, wonderful, talented educators. And there is really none that is at the level of Dr. Lisa Floyd and her ability to translate complex and challenging concepts when it comes to coding into the hands of teachers and students. And she's been doing this work now for a number of years, and I'm really pleased to be able to utilize her services in the work that I do here at Advanced Learning Partnerships. Lisa's done a number of projects for us and continues to do that, and I just sit back and I'm amazed at how wonderful she's able to communicate. And time after time, people come back and tell me how great her sessions were. So honored today to have a conversation with Lisa and get further context and background around her love of coding. And again, today's broadcast is brought to you by Advanced Learning Partnerships. We do professional learning across communities in North America, and as I mentioned, Lisa's part of our team. As you may or may not know, because you may be listening to this on Spotify or Apple or some other format, but if you happen to be on our YouTube channel, you will see there's no video. Just a weird glitch I had with Zencaster this week. That didn't happen. So if you're watching on YouTube, you're probably seeing, I don't know, a picture of me right now, or at least I haven't even edited this for video, so I'm not sure what you're going to see. But anyway, I actually prefer that you listen to it straight as a podcast. I think that's the best way to consume this stuff. So anyway, without further ado, here is my conversation with Lisa Floyd. So how did you find your way into coding?
Wow. When I first started teaching in 2002, I was actually qualified to teach science. And my first teaching job in Woodstock, Ontario, there was a position that involved teaching science as well as computer science. And at the time, my husband, Steve, was in Teachers College, and he was doing computer science as a teachable. So I said, yeah, sure, I can teach computer science. And I knew that I could, get some support from him along the way. But I ended up loving it. And I kind of felt like it was like one of the best kept secrets, sort of like teaching phys ed in a way, because the way students would be engaged, it was just a different type of learning that was happening in the classroom. So then after that, I just continued to teach computer science. I went and took a night course at Western University just to make sure for when I did teach grade 12 computer science, I would be prepared. So I took first year university computer science course. And I actually really enjoyed that too. Kind of wish I could go back and do a new degree. But then after that, I taught computer science for about maybe 13 years or so. And then when I was returning from my third maternity leave, I remember saying to my husband that I think I want to do more with coding, with computer programming, because it's just too valuable, like the type of thinking that's happening. in my classroom, and I wanted to kind of foster that in other classes. And I also felt that students could do this when they're younger. So to try and start supporting doing some outreach for younger students and teachers of younger students. And so then that's when I returned from my maternity leave and organized a few events. And it just so happened that the administration at my school at the time, and so my principal and vice principal were super supportive. They didn't really know me very well, but they took a chance and said yes. And so we held like a feeder school event for all the teachers to come, and we did a whole coding thing, and I showed them how they could integrate it into their classes. And then just all kind of spiraled, I guess, in a good way from there. I started to teach at the university, did my master's, and swore I would never do my any more graduate work. And then a couple years later started my PhD, and it's all related to coding. So it's just I absolutely love it. And I'm so glad that I decided to kind of pursue that. I guess that was about 6 or 7 years ago now.
Well, we're sure glad you decided to pursue it. But looking back, like I'm thinking about my own first sort of introduction to the idea of coding, and it was with Logo, like that online programming of Logo,
Awesome.
and the right turn, left turn, and all of that stuff. And I mean, that was, I think, I'm going back to like late '90s, even with that, maybe even early '90s. So when you started, like maybe just talk a little bit about some of the languages that you learned and maybe even what that evolution looks like, because you make an interesting point in that I think probably when you started it was very much focused on upper upper high school kind of things. There really wasn't much to focus on elementary, and now I know a lot of the work you do is really focused on elementary, getting them started in coding. But just maybe just even a bit of a history of sort of the languages and the evolution of some of the ways in which you've engaged in coding.
Sure. Well, when I think back to the first class that I was teaching, it was a grade 10 computer science class, I think. And it was just amazing the way the students would be. It was like we opened up this whole new world to them when they were learning how to program a computer. And I, I felt that they could do this just at younger ages. Like it really didn't matter when they started it; they'd still have the capability to do this, computational thinking and to program a computer. So when I first started teaching, we were using Turing, which is actually more of a learning language. And there's some debate on which languages you should be teaching students to learn to code. And I actually am not really, I don't think it really matters that much. However, sometimes when you start with something with a lot of syntax, so syntax, kind of comparing it to in a paragraph, you have like periods and apostrophes and colons and things like that. In computer programming, it's that sort of thing as well. So there's a lot more of it, like with brackets and things. So that would be the syntax, and that makes it a little more challenging sometimes for students when they're trying to program. Is they run into a lot of syntax errors. So Turing, it didn't have as much of that syntax to worry about. So I love Turing. I think it's a wonderful learning language. Right now, some of the students, or what we're doing in some school boards, are working with something called Lynx, which is also considered a learning language. It's sort of a bridge between block-based and text-based. So it's another great learning language as well. Since then, I've been teaching some with Python. I did a lot of Visual Basic, which was neat because you focus a lot on the user interface with Visual Basic. But I also did some Arduino code with students. And I like
Mhm.
that because it took the programming not just on the computer, but moved it away from the computer, a little bit more hands on, where we would set up circuits and students could program little LEDs to flash and turn on fans and things like that.
Right.
So that I found kind of changed my practice a lot when I started doing that. It kind of engaged a few more learners, I felt. And so that's sort of the evolution of languages, I suppose, over the course of my career so
Yeah.
far. I did sometimes allow students, if they prefer to try a different language, it didn't really matter to me. I wasn't really nervous to like. It's hard to change your whole teaching to switch to a different language because you have to kind of change your resources and how you teach it in a way. But the logic is the same with every language.
Right.
So if a student was willing to try to apply what we were doing with the rest of the class to a different language, then I was willing to try and support them with that.
Well, and it seems like as I think about some of the newer coding programs, is the biggest shift is that there's just more immediate feedback for people, right? Like you're not spending hours and hours and hours trying to uh, you know program something only to find out, oh crap, it didn't work, and then having to go back and try to figure out. Whereas now so much of it is, you plug in some code and you see if the thing lights up or if the thing moves or doesn't do what you want it to. So I think that has to be a huge um, uh, benefit, if you will, to engaging kids in the coding process.
Yeah, I feel like I haven't seen the languages change that much since I started teaching in 2002. And even when I remember using Turing in high school, and I wasn't as amazed by it then. I think I didn't fully understand its true potential. But maybe now they do sometimes give you a little bit more heads up about where the error might be. But I sort of love that part of programming and I feel like it kind of changes our mindsets um, about learning because we run into so many
Right.
errors, and then we can, put our heads together and figure out how we're going to fix that error. And it's that celebration when we do finally fix the error that it's almost like addicting. It's exciting. The students want more of it, even though they're so frustrated at the time. And I was doing a session 2 days ago, and I could see that, it was with teachers and they were feeling frustrated, and I knew that. But I knew as soon as they would start seeing it work, that they would want more. And it's just something about programming that affords that. And I feel like it might be transferable. I know there are some people are saying that it is transferable, but I don't know if there's a lot of research on that right now. But I think as educators, anyone who's taught it feels that it is something that could be transferable to other aspects of our lives and of our learning, where we're not going to give up. We want to just keep going and
Yeah.
see, errors as more opportunities for learning.
Well, and yeah, and I mean, I think that is sort of, even things that we used to say or still say in some degrees when it comes to higher level math. And when kids would ask, "Oh, when am I ever going to use this?" and often the response is, I mean, sometimes it's not satisfying, but it is true that you are learning to think, and you are learning to solve problems, and you're learning to uncover errors. So you're certainly developing a mindset with that. And I think coding would be even more so, where if this thing isn't working, it could be something super super minor that you did not check. So I guess I'm wondering, do you feel that it's easier, like so when you're working with students or working with teachers, do you feel like there's just certain people that come in it with a more natural disposition to be able to work in that kind, like they're excited to solve problems and are find that the joy in that you've kind of described? Or do you find that no, that's something that you can actually teach people to get? So I guess I'm almost sort of probing if around the idea of growth and fixed mindsets, which, I mean, I guess maybe the easy answer to say, well, it's all growth mindset and everyone can learn that. But I just wonder if you sort of sense that there are certain people that are just better suited because of their personality to coding than others.
Yeah, I feel like there are people who are really open to try things. And then there are also people who might have um, just to be a little bit more stronger with logical thinking. So it's kind of like two things happening at the same time in parallel. So often when I work with a school board, the coordinator might mention, we have some teachers who are really hesitant and a bit nervous about this. And that's super common. Like, I would say, most teachers who have not done coding before feel hesitant and nervous. And that's completely accessible. Like, I totally understand where they're coming from. But I always just smile and say, sure, no problem. We'll work through this. And And I know that once they experience that excitement when they do, have a bug and fix it, or when they start to see the type of thinking that's happening, especially when we have students sometimes included in PD, or if we're out in a classroom, they see the magic that's happening. It seems like magic sometimes. They see the special thinking that's happening, the way students are approaching problems, and the way they're really legitimately engaged. And so when they see that, I know that they want to do everything they can to support their students, and they just can't help but want to keep going because they see what it does for their students. So most like teachers obviously really care about their students and want to see them be successful. And so I think that tends to change their mindset about it. And once they realize themselves that they can do it, now, then when you think about people who maybe are just more naturally logical thinkers, I would say I wouldn't call myself like a super strong programmer, but with time and with effort, and I don't give up. It really tends to make a difference. And I think because I enjoy it, like I enjoy being challenged, and I think I've actually gotten much better at thinking logically, and I think I've become better at programming just from helping students debug and teachers debug their programs. I
Right.
kind of joke that I'm a really good debugger because that's pretty much all I'm doing when I'm teaching. I'm just walking around supporting students like with their individual errors, and then like that actually helps me. I'm very efficient now at helping people fix their errors because of all that practice.
Well, and I think about my own. I can relate to it in terms of, especially when I used to do a lot of video editing. Back in the day when programs were very, very unstable, and if you didn't get one thing, if you put something in the wrong place, it wouldn't render, and so I would spend hours and hours trying to figure out why projects weren't working, and sometimes you just put something in the wrong spot or whatever it might have been, and you're also at the same time constantly searching forums and help desks for why isn't this working. And there is quite a high when you actually figure it out, but part of it is not, it's not just in that case, it's about, there's an end goal. Like I'm trying to create something, and so yes, the debugging part uh is nice to be able to overcome, but it's for a purpose, right? That you see the thing that you're creating at the end, which maybe leads me to a question, thinking about like what are some of the really exciting projects that you've seen kids be able to produce, or that you've produced, or been part of. So in terms of like not just coding as a process, as a thinking tool, but actually to create and design things.
I think you're definitely onto something there with like you're working towards a purpose. And I think that's
Right.
what really drives people. It's worth all those errors, I think, in the end when you finally finish what you've been working on for so long, and what your intention is. So with I'm trying to think of any particular project, but I guess it's more of like the feeling and seeing the students work through the process. So I remember teaching a grade 11 programming, and students, and I'd finish the semester and then I'd be into the next semester, and they'd always have to do a final, like some sort of culminating task at the end. There was a lot of choice involved. It wasn't just always a game. It's something we have to try to consider, that not all students will want to create games. They can create, all kinds of different projects. But the students would come to me like weeks after I already marked and submitted their final marks for their accommodating task for the whole course, and they'd show me that they made it better. They went back and they adjusted their final project. So it kind of moved away from being about the mark. It wasn't about finishing the course anymore. It was just about this vision that they had, and how they would come up with more ideas to keep going. So they were really intrinsically motivated, and that was always really special to me. So no matter what they were working on, whether it was a game or whether it was like some students doing something with a website, or if they're working with a programmable device like Arduino, where they wanted it to, I don't know, make some sort of wearable technology, whatever it was just it was important to them. It was almost, it was like personal. It was, they were creating for a purpose, and in some cases it was to support others, and maybe um, they got an idea and they wanted to help others around the school or in the community solve a problem. So I think that's more what sticks with me than actual individual projects. And even all the projects
Hmm.
that I've worked on in creating resources for teachers, I feel like it's more that feeling of when they're the students or the teachers are creating something, and they just want to keep going with it. I think that just speaks for itself when students are coming up to you. Like even later on down the line, I'll have people message me, and they'll say, "Oh, you taught me computer science a few years ago, and now I'm working for whatever company, or I went and
Yeah.
pursued it in college or university." And something I hear a lot too is some of the people who identify as a woman will say to me, it was because I had a female computer science teacher that I felt like I could
Hmm.
could do this. So that's kind of neat too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just part of the appeal is that you're just creating more opportunities for kids and for kids to see themselves in a position that perhaps they didn't previously. So that's awesome too. What about when we think about kind of the shift in, and I know you'd be most familiar with Ontario, but maybe you have some other, I know you also work across Canada, just to be able to see a change in the way in which coding has elevated itself within curriculum, within um, teaching in general, so that it's not just this niche computer science experience, but it actually can be utilized more broadly. So what, just generally speaking, like what are you excited about in terms of the way in which it has been elevated as its importance in the educational experience for all kids across Canada?
So I remember part of the reason why I wanted to do outreach with elementary schools was to get students into programming at a younger age before they decided that coding wasn't for them. They wouldn't be good at it. It was it was a certain stereotype that they imagined doing computer programming. And part of it was that I had at the time like one maybe two computers or students who were girls in my classes and I wanted to change that. So by having a couple of those students help me with the outreach for elementary school students, that seemed to make a big difference. And because a lot of times the one of my students, actually, I remember she said to me, Marta was her name, she said, I wish we could have done computer programming in elementary school because a lot of my friends have been intimidated to take it. And they had known
Hmm.
that, they could do it and they would enjoy it. I think we'd have more students taking computer science in high school. So that really drove me to push for for coding to be taken by all. And so I am, excited that it's now in the curriculum in Ontario as a mandatory part of the curriculum for grades 1 to 8 and 9 in mathematics. Sometimes I get a little bit nervous because of there hasn't been a ton of support for professional development alongside the new curriculum being released. So that concerns me a little bit because teachers are struggling a bit because they just have not had
Hmm.
adequate in service. And then there's also the issue with having release time for teachers to work on learning coding so that they
Right.
can teach it in
Yeah.
their classrooms. So that has caused some stress for me, knowing that maybe students are not getting the chance to actually do coding. Maybe they're doing unplugged activities, which I feel like aren't really giving them an opportunity to experience the true affordances of coding. But I feel like, over the next few years, and I've seen so many teachers put themselves out there and do their best to learn coding to support their students, and they see that it's beneficial. I do feel like it's helping with the equity issue. We're broadening participation in computer science. I think maybe we'll start to see more of the impacts of that. Whether or not more go into computer science is really just that more people are aware of its potential and have a better understanding of how the world around them works. Um, so yeah, I'm really happy about this. I feel like in the past only students who could afford after school activities were engaged with coding, but now everybody is going to be doing coding during the day.
Right.
I know there's some concerns about whether some schools in remote locations might not have access to technology. We just have to work that out. We have to figure out how to make sure that they have access to the technology, because if we're doing unplugged activities with some students while other students are getting the opportunity to work with the technology, we're just furthering that divide. We're widening the gap. And so we just need to push to make sure that everyone has a technology and then give everyone a chance to do coding in schools. So it's promising, all this new
Well, and I
curriculum.
think, yeah, but I mean, I think it's typical the way that a lot of that happens, right? A province decides, hey, let's do this thing, and they haven't really worked out all of the kinks, and they kind of leave that for schools and school districts to figure it out. So identifying the fact that, hey, there could be some potential inequities here if we're not careful, I think that's probably true in so many rollouts. But to the credit of the province, to at least say, we think this is important. We think kids need to have an understanding of this at some level, I think is at least something to be acknowledged. Because I know that's not true. That's not true everywhere around the world. That kids are now mandated to have some experience with coding.
Yeah,
So that's the
absolutely.
positive, and we'll try to figure out the way to make it more equitable. And people like you are certainly leading the way. So last question about coding. So for people that are just they're kind of interested in this, what are some of your kind of go-to resources for people just to get started? Like if you had two or three uh, books, websites, whatever you would recommend for people to say, this is a good place to start. What would you recommend?
I guess it kind of depends on the purpose of what you're doing. So if you're looking just to learn like a little bit about coding, I think it's awesome to check out the resources that are available on the Scratch website. There are a lot of resources for learning how to code on code.org, but it's really awesome if you have a chance to work kind of in an environment where it's more of like a playground versus like structured materials, and just explore and dive right in. When it's more for coding in the context of mathematics, like it is in Ontario or in Alberta, where they're looking at coding in the context of science. And then in Ontario as well, in grade 9 science, I think there are different resources then that you'd have to focus on. So I'm working on my
Mm-hmm.
PhD right now, and my supervisor is Dr. George Gadanidis, and he has some amazing resources. He's been doing this for years, well before it was part of our curriculum here in Ontario. So it's definitely something to check out. Some of his resources are on learnx.ca. But I love YouTube. Anytime I can't do something, I just look it up and find it, and somebody has created a tutorial somewhere. And I also try to contribute to that as well. So if a teacher ever asks me a question about something with coding, I'll try to just make a video and throw it up on techthings.ca on my YouTube. On my husband and I share a YouTube channel, and then we find that people are really grateful for that. So it's not super professional when I go up and do them. I don't try to edit the video
Mm-hmm.
very much. I just explain how to do it and then put it up there, and hopefully that helps people out. But there's so many supportive resources out
Yeah.
there. And I think, like you said, the fact that Ontario and some other jurisdictions have put this, like made it policy, like now we have to do it. So we can't have excuses anymore. We have to dive in and learn it. And I think once people see what's happening with coding, and like whether it's for the purpose of teaching or just for their own learning, they will not look back. They'll want to do more, or they want to encourage their own children to do more of coding. It's just it's a pretty awesome skill to have, but and it's enjoyable as well, I think.
Well, again, we are grateful for the work that you've been doing and continue to do, and I know you're always willing to share too. So that I always, when I think about resources, I don't just think in terms of content. I think about who are the people to pay attention to, and you and Stephen are certainly two of Canada's best in the educational field as well. So we'll shift to a little more personal questions. So Lisa, you are a busy mother of four and husband and wife, and in addition to all this amazing stuff that you do. So I don't even know what if you have or are, but I don't know if you have a book to share that you're reading, whether it's personal or professional. If you have time for that, is there a book you got on the go?
Oh, well, I have to even look at the title that I have on my phone right now. So, what I've been doing lately is listening to audiobooks or a lot of podcasts. I'll
Mm-hmm.
share maybe that. I was reading on my Kobo a lot, but I gave that up to my son because his broke. So, I've been listening, and I find it's nice when I'm doing tasks like cleaning around the house or running or working out. I really shifted from listening to music to listening to podcasts, and they kind of help me feel inspired with other aspects of my life. But one of the podcasts that I listen to, and I wouldn't recommend this necessarily for children, but for educators or anyone interested in sports, it would be a former colleague of mine who actually coaches an Olympic athlete, Damian Warner. He's a decathlete. So he started coaching Damien in high school when I taught with Gar at Montcalm Secondary School here in London. And then he's continued to be Damien's coach for years and years. And he's actually an Olympic gold medalist. So he has a podcast called The World According to Gar, and he's at like episode
Mm,
144. So I've really enjoyed listening
wow.
to that. So that's kind of something different. For my kids, we've been listening to like on car trips because we've been traveling a lot for basketball. Brains On is one of our favorites, and Smash Boom Best as well. And then the book that I'm listening to, this might kind of tell you a little bit about um, me being, I guess, a little bit older now and trying to stay young with a 1-year-old at home. I'm just opening up my Audible app because I can never remember the titles of books, but it's called Young Forever, and it's really just about changing kind of our just thinking a little bit more about what we eat and sort of small little
Yes.
lifestyle changes, and it's really kind of science based. It's neat to put to actually understand why certain things might help us to live a little longer and be healthy while we
Right.
live a little longer. So I just shared a lot of
Cool.
a lot about myself there, I think.
No. Yeah, well, no, I mean, I think everybody you reach a certain age and realize, "Oh, right, I can't eat just whatever I want anymore. That's not fun." But that's the reality,
Well,
and
I
you wake
still
up
can
and,
never
"Oh,
give up
why
that
why does
chocolate.
this ache?" Well, I know, but you also can't eat, it used to be I never even thought about what I
Totally.
ate. I just ate what I wanted to eat. Now
Yep.
it's like, okay, if I can eat what I'll do some things, but I can't do it
Yes.
all. But I was curious when you mentioned because I love the idea of listening to something for the whole family. So you've got a 1-year old. How old is your
He's
oldest?
14.
So this the series that you mentioned, like what age groups? Because I think it's cool if you can find something that I mean, I'm sure your 1-year old maybe isn't super. She's not maybe super engaged, but and you have three, and your three older are boys,
Yeah,
right?
they're at 10, 12, and 14.
Okay, well, that's a bit of they're fairly close together, so that's good. Yeah, I was just curious because I think people always are looking for, whether it's a movie or something that, a range of people would enjoy. So I think anytime you can find something that fits in that, that's
Yeah, I find
that's
those
kind of
podcasts
gold.
really change our trips. Like it gives us something to talk about. They're you're learning so much when you're listening to them, and
Hmm.
I don't know, it just really passes the time in a neat way. So I highly recommend those podcasts and some of the other ones that are a little bit more like for older people. But we've been listening to those sometimes if I just kind of check the titles and make sure that they'd be okay for our kids to listen to. But the
Right.
happiness lab is something that my husband and
Yeah,
I
I love
sometimes
that
listen
one.
to, and the kids will as well. And so I it's just it really has changed. Like starting to listen to podcasts and has really kind of changed. Just hearing from different perspectives as well, and I've learned so much. So that's why I was happy to be on this podcast with
Well,
you, Dean.
yeah, yeah. Well, those car trips, I think about, when my kids were younger, like those were some of the only times that you actually had a captive audience. And but again, my kids were, there was, we I remember, the DVD in the car was a big thing for them, and so that would, you'd use that. But you also, like, can only watch so much TV, and then you actually, would fumble into these really great conversations you'd have. But I think about, like, if kids have individual devices, it, like when you're talking about the happiness lab, like I think one of the joys, I guess, or I don't know if I would call it joys, but like moments in parenting is when your kids start to appreciate some of the, I mean, even though that's not designed for kids, the fact that they're going to listen in and can glean something from it, I think that's just always really cool, that they're interested in something that mom and dad are. So whether it's music or TV, or in this case a podcast, I think that's kind of neat that they're going to want to join in on that.
Yeah, for sure. And I've noticed sometimes I won't think that they're listening. Like they look like they're kind of doing something else, looking out the window, or and then later on they'll say something about it. So I know that they were listening. But it does give us something to talk about too. And one of my sons gets car sick, so looking at a screen isn't fun for him. So that way we can all participate in something together, and just he can just close his eyes and listen. And then every so often we'll pause it, and they'll say, put it back on, but I just want to talk about something I've heard.
Nice.
But when they're asking me to put it back on, then it must be a pretty good podcast.
So you live in London, Ontario, and I always like to ask, like, what is sort of a local or underrated attraction that somebody visiting the area should check out?
Well, I think maybe during the pandemic, we realized this even more. But we always appreciated, we live in London, which is called the Forest City. And so there are just so many trails, hiking trails. And so that's just something like just really close to, no matter where you live in London, you're always close to a hiking trail and just beautiful forests. So that's something I really love about London. I also love that it just feels like, I grew up in a small town, so I've always kind of wanted to live in a small town, but London almost feels a little bit of like a small town, even though it's a bigger city. I feel like it does. It feels like more of a community feeling, like a small town would. So those are a couple of things I like about London.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, I mean, I've driven through London. I've been to it a few times. It always seems like a place I'd like to check out more. So maybe we'll do that one. Well, thank you, Lisa, for your time. And again, thank you so much for all of the great contributions you make to educators across Ontario and Canada and beyond. And we're always grateful for your work and grateful for your time.
Well, thank you for having me. It's really like an honor to be on Dean Shareski's podcast. So thanks. I
Uh-huh.
appreciate it.
Well, thank you again. Apologize, we don't have any video, but hopefully people are watching saying, "Oh, I got," because again, I think podcasts are best in an audio format. You take it wherever you go, and you kind of have this intimate experience with speakers. And so I hope people find it fine. But anyway, good talking to you.
Awesome.